Okay, I think we're good to go. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the team from Carrot Fertility today, which is Jimmy and Aoife, to talk about the case for a global family building benefit strategy. So over to yourselves.
Thank you ever so much. Well, firstly, thank you all for sparing some time from what is a very action-packed day here at REBA. It's amazing to see how it's grown over the years. So many different vendors. So thank you for sparing some time to come and see us. As a little bit of background, Carrot are a global family-forming, fertility and lifelong hormonal health benefit provider. We're doing that in 170 markets. We're working with over 1,000 organisations globally and equally supporting 4 million members. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about how we're supporting our current clients to drive value from the benefit proposition, how they've launched this benefit, and ultimately how they've gone through some of the challenges of finding budget to support this kind of offer. To give you some context, I've been working in the employee benefit space now for about 15 years, just shy of 15 years. I work both at the consultancy side, working at scaling global technology, but at the same time, I've worked in the last 5 years within the benefit provider space, focused very much on health and wellbeing and looking at how we drive improved values and clinical outcomes. One of the things that I've really seen over the last sort of 10 or so years is how technologies really transform the way in which HR reward professionals like yourself in the room have been able to offer benefits at a global level. And what I mean by that is the speed in which you can now provide access for individuals, how you can streamline administration, how you can provide greater compliance and risk at a global level, but also how you can get access to more insights and data. So what we want to talk about today is a little bit around how we're supporting our clients to do that already, but equally also talk to you a little bit around that benefit ecosystem. So when we think about the deployment of any benefit, my view is very much that there's been a seismic shift now from a leadership perspective around how organisations are asking HR board leaders to ultimately display more than just utilisation. So impact. How are they displaying impact? And what I mean by that is it's no longer good enough to be talking about a shift from 8 to 9% utilisation, from 20-30%. It's how that aligns ultimately to core values, visions, corporate growth strategy, inclusivity. So there's different factors that we're seeing from our clients that they're demanding of us to ultimately showcase in part of a business case. So we want to talk much more around that integration, that connectivity, and ultimately how we guide individuals, members within Carrot, to find the right care at the right time. It's really important to focus on that care pathway, that member journey, and also understanding the ancillary benefits that are available to them so that we're not duplicating, but we're making sure that they're signposted to the right information. So I'm going to hand over to Aoife now, who's going to talk a little bit more around the size and scale of the potential problem and how you can actually capture more members' minds in the organisation.
Wonderful. So thank you very much. My name is Aoife Lucey. Let's interrogate the problem first off to understand that our starting point before we get into building the business cases on solid ground. So if we look at the problem of family building, a lot of people automatically jump to, okay, IVF. And yes, IVF is a part of that, but it's a part. So if we look at IVF, you might know and also understand the World Health Organization says that it's 1 in 6. So in any employee base, you'll have 1 in 6 individuals who will struggle to get pregnant and stay pregnant. This is a statistic that is growing every single day consistently. Probably the underlying trend that's mostly driving this is delayed parenthood. And so what we understand to be true in the UK today is that the average age of an individual having their first child is at 29.9, so it's around 30. But if we look at Italy, you're probably talking about 31.6. And I had a call earlier on the week with a client in Hong Kong, and they're getting closer to 33. So we know that this statistic is only going in one direction. But this is the heterosexual couples who will, of course, over time, increasingly need support in order to start their families. But let's look beyond the heterosexual couples into the fastest growing fertility treatment in the UK right now, which is the next slide. Oh yeah, you've got it. The previous, is cryopreservation of oocytes. That's egg freezing for all of us, the standard. So women in their early 30s and going through their 20s are actively looking at this at a faster rate than any other treatment in the entire suite of services. In the 20s, obviously at the peak of fertility, looking to preserve their fertility. And we know that this has increased by 81% according to the HFEA, which is our regulator here in the UK. And that is between 3 years, between 2019 and 2022. But what we know to be true already, they'll study it in another year and a half, is that it's growing at an exceptional rate. In addition to the cryopreservation of oocytes, we also have different cohorts within any employee base that are starting to look at building their families in a different way. So single parents by choice, like myself, it's 27% of single employees plan to pursue parenthood without a partner. And then if we look at a sizable cohort in any employee base of LGBTQ+, where 9% of people identify, 63% of those who are in couple want to start a family in the future. IVF is not an option for a lot of folk who will have to look at adoption or surrogacy or other routes to market. If you want a diversity and equity and inclusion within your base, these are things to consider in your business case from the get-go. But if we move on to people who are successful in getting pregnant, there are supports along that that are required. 80% of working women will become pregnant at some stage during their career. And then we also know that 11% of the total labour force are parents to young children. So again, the need for supports around that, right through to menopause and low testosterone. So we know that on the next slide, we know that 20% of the workforce is going through some stage of the menopausal journey right now. And then we also know that 20% of men are struggling with low testosterone right now, because after the age of 30, testosterone in men reduces by 1% every year. So all of a sudden we take a step back and we understand that if we look at the 4 generations plus that are representational in any employee base, and we look at any employee base through the lens of lifelong hormonal health, which is what we do at Carrot, then all of a sudden it is not a niche problem, and therefore it has to be a holistic solution that we look to from the get-go. One that takes care of everybody at each stage along their lifelong hormonal health. And that's absolutely key. So starting from that point, before we move into the business case, let's look at the problems that exist to make sure that we've got a shared background of obviousness. So we have over, well over 1,000 clients across the globe at this stage. And there is a plethora of problems that exist, both at an employee level and an employer level. So I've just taken the top 4 that we experience right now in our client and employee base. For employees, they're navigating these journeys anyway, right? So whether you have a benefit or you don't have a benefit, they're doing it themselves anyway. And the challenges that they're coming across are substantial. The first one, cost of care, is prohibitive. So in the UK, we're talking about 5,000 to 7,000 for a round of IVF if we're just talking about IVF. But 73% of all fertility journeys right now in the UK are paid for out of pocket. And that's over 80% in the Greater London area. And we know that that number is only moving one direction. So that is a lot of pressure that's put squarely on the shoulders of any employee who's trying to build a family in whichever way it takes them to build that family. Time pressure is key. We have every single industry represented in that client base that we're talking to. And when we start talking about professional services or banking or any of those in particular, the employees are paid well, but they're time poor. And especially when you're trying to navigate complex societal systems, it is very, very challenging. But what we know from also going through a fertility journey, Fertility Network UK tell us that it's approximately almost shy of 9 days that any individual who's going through an IVF journey take off during a single cycle in order to be able to navigate the need at that time. So it's driving absenteeism into the base, of course, and presenteeism. Finding the right provider is key. Jimmy spoke to our entire ethos is getting the right person to the right support at the right time to drive the right outcome. And that is incredibly difficult when you're doing it on your own, because providers are not created equal. Fertility clinics are not created equal. Lawyers who specialize in modern family building aren't. Surrogacy agencies, adoption agencies. So how do I know which is the right one for me? That is a challenge that a lot of employees are grappling with, as well as the complex system that I spoke to. You know, we've got the 42 integrated care boards here just in England. And each one of those have a different set of criteria upon which you either qualify or don't qualify. It's known as the postcode lottery. So all of these things together, challenging. But let's look through the lens of the employer. You know, they also have a very complex system to navigate, because essentially every employer wants to give global equity, right? Whether they're in the UK, equity across their entire employee base, or across the globe as much as possible, where it's possible, equity. But that's not how the systems are set up, and navigating that is incredibly complex. And historically, the point solution challenge around this area has been a tricky piece to navigate. But the real big challenge, the real elephant in the room here, and that everybody is grappling with, is the total cost of healthcare, because the increase in that is squeezing our budgets. And that is making it incredibly hard to do what we want to do to support our employees. And we hear this every day from our clients. So why the focus today on ROI and cost containment and building out that killer business case is because of exactly that. This total cost of healthcare is putting that emphasis on ROI and making sure that it pays, and that you can see that tangibly coming out in outcomes. So without further ado, we'll move on to our view of the world. So when we're working and partnering with any employer, one thing that we precision focus on is a deep understanding of their core need. And that is where we start. What is the problem that they are looking to solve? What is their core need within their organization? Because every single drive that we have towards extreme value has to be directly relation to that need. And so that's key. And we really look at that core need through and delivering of the value into that in 3 ways. The first is around improved health outcomes. Essentially, every single interaction that we have to have with an employee, with a Carrot member, has to be proven to their employer that we have improved their health. We have to do that. We have to show that in a very tangible way. So on our next slide, which is our last, Jimmy will be talking about the 7 levers that Carrot pull on to support delivering this. But we are delighted that all of those combine to drive out a 60% of our members choose a less invasive approach to their journey as a result of having Carrot. And that's key for us. Why? Is because, for example, again, IVF, you know, if you can avoid that journey at all, do. Because it's physically, it's an emotional, but it's financially draining. And if people will hear, oh, I've got a problem creating a family, a lot of us jump to IVF, that it's the answer, and it's not always the answer. So when we surround them with a hug of clinical-led objective information, as well as a set of experts, a whole set, not just a single reproductive endocrinologist, but a urologist as well, because it's not always female challenge, you know, a nutritionist, precision ovulation tracking, all the product supports around baseline testing, and you bring them all together in a hug of supports, all of a sudden, that employee, our Carrot member, has lots of different options that are grounded, and then they can make an informed decision on the right way to get the outcome that they want. It's not just IVF. 60% of the time that is the case. If I move on to elevated member experience and retention, that's absolutely key. Because sometimes you can't avoid IVF, right? And I'm giving IVF as an example. This could equally be menopause. This could equally be adoption or surrogacy or pregnancy or parenting. But anybody who has to go through one of those journeys, we're very proud of the 9 and 10 member retention rate post-IVF, whether they were successful or not. And that's key. Because what the member is telling us in that moment, and we've got all the testimonials and the nuggets that are behind us, hundreds of them. But this statistic tells a story, and that is that in my most vulnerable, my employer was behind me, putting in place a hug of supports that were clinical, that were emotional, that were mental and financial to ensure that my journey was supported. Thank you. And it builds incredible level of loyalty into employee base, and we find that is agnostic of industry. And probably the most important is the last, which is cost containment and ROI. There are a plethora of ways, depending on your region, depending on your country, of getting cost out of this system. And what we find is just by privilege of opening up our access to our own parallel network of partners, we can take 20% out of an average cycle. And when you think about an average cycle being between 5,000 and 7,000 in the UK, these are important numbers that support the member in making it more affordable, whether the employer is offering a financial stipend to support them or not. But these are all three value elements. But if we take a step back and aggregate them all up into an individual value driver for the employer, it is exceptional. And I like to use a case study because it's one of the more latest case studies that we've done in the last few months, and that is of a professional services company. They're global, they've got a global footprint, but they're headquartered out of the UK. And of course, like I mentioned at the start, we partnered with them to understand what is their core need. Their core need was a problem that they had around growth. Their growth was starting to be stunted as a result of an underlying problem of attrition that they were experiencing. They were hitting around 20% attrition. And they were saying, okay, we are attracting the best talent, but we're having a challenge about keeping them. And that goes across many different generations. So how do we do this? Partnering with them and helping them, and we'll talk about the support elements in a second, but we're precision focused on that. We partnered with them and we found a beautiful ratio of 1:4. 1 invested, 4 cost out. And that is something that is actually quite indicative when we look at the case studies across our industries. So we like to get to that granular level. How are we going to help your members? But how does that aggregate up into helping you as an employer? What is the actual value that is driven out to meet that need that you identified at the start?
I think it's such a key point because to my earlier kind of remark, each organisation is different. We understand the values, the vision, the culture, the ethos is going to be different, and how we align to that is absolutely fundamental to a successful launch, and how that's then driving increased engagement on an ongoing basis. The way in which we actually deploy that and do that, I want to talk you through now. So I get the kind of fun bit, which is more a case of like for the member, how we improve their health outcomes and get them, into a better place. Eva's already touched upon it. We call it the hug, and it's something that at Carrot we're really passionate about. It's about giving people in the moment care. It's about giving people in the moment access to a human, so they can speak to someone and get guidance and support. And ultimately, it's about focusing on a multitude of different journeys. What we recognise is that every individual across your demographic, wherever they are geographically, is going to have a unique journey to them. So if you look in the middle, you'll see areas like journeys, I should say, such as planning. So these are individuals that are considering going on a journey, and they're looking at education. So we'll come to talk a little bit more around what we do and how we support them, but it's that initial phase around, I'm thinking about going on this journey, I need some guidance. Then it might be that someone's made the decision. So they've decided to go on a journey, such as IVF, as an example. Then they need to get a better understanding of what is available to them, what options. There's a financial impact, there's potentially a physical and mental impact to that. So we want to look at that at a holistic level and make sure that the support and care that they're getting is accessible, it's equitable, and it's personalised and unique to them. Equally, if someone's then actually pregnant and they're going through that journey, there's going to be a multitude of different factors that they're going to experience. We want to be able to hold their hand through that journey so they have a positive outcome. And then from a parenting perspective, as a father myself of 2 young children, we have sleep consultants, we have lactation consultants, experts that can support you in identifying neurodiversity amongst children. So many different elements that you potentially don't consider that we can provide support and guidance with. And we're talking about different journeys at different times. So it might be that, my children 4 and 2 years old, Carrot's introduced, I'm at a different space to where Aoife is in her journey. It's about making sure that's tailored. And then equally for men's and women's health, we've touched upon menopause, but that's another journey that we want to support. And when we look at infertility, 40% of cases are due to the male. So it's about understanding that, giving discreet support to males where potentially there's stigma attached to it. So how do we do that? How do we do that through the hug? Well, initially, you're greeted when you get access to Carrot to a repository, a platform of content, a blended learning approach, a vast array of materials, whether it be podcasts, videos, tutorials, articles, but it's all curated for the individual. Now, and that's the planning phase, so we give access to all of the information 24/7. But if someone then decides they're going to pursue a journey, then what we do is connect them with an individual. It's a human, so it's a care companion, a Carrot care companion, and that individual will create a plan. Typically, it's the next 5 steps that they should consider. So if we take the IVF example, because we've used it a couple of times now, well, what's the implications to that? What's the cost implication? What's the potential timeline? What are the options available to you? Your postcode, you're in SW6, right? These are the clinics that you might want to consider. We've vetted those clinics so we can guide and recommend. We've got financial benefits through that provider steerage that we've set up. So we can offer up to 20% discount at specific agnostic, we should say, vetted clinics, but it might be also connecting someone to a lawyer if they're thinking about adoption, surrogacy. So there's different journeys, but making sure that people get in the moment guidance and ultimately they've got a plan that's unique to them as an individual. We also recognise that when we talk about health equity, that not everybody's got the financial capability to simply pay for an IVF journey or surrogacy, for example. So what we're seeing from organisations, and the case study mentioned with the professional services organisation, is that often organisations now are looking at a financial stipend. So 70% of our 1,000+ clients have placed a stipend within their plan. So their Carrot plan has some element of financial reimbursement. Now, we can provide that through a Carrot card. It's a debit card that the individual, the member, can use in a specific clinic or with a specific expert when they're using that service. So no longer do they need to fork out that money themselves and then be reimbursed and there's a delay. They can use that. So hopefully it just gives them greater access. It also, for HR and reward professionals, streamlines a lot of that administration. So that reimbursement, that governance, that process is managed by Carrot. So we're able to do the checks to make sure that ultimately members are doing what they should do and they're playing within the rules. In addition to that, when someone's going through a journey, you never know what's around the corner. And I recall to Aoife, when we had our first child, there was a moment where we came out of a scan and there was some negative news. We needed to go back for another scan in a couple of weeks' time, but that was a long period of time to wait. My wife did the immediate thing, which was go to Dr. Google. Not good. That afternoon, 4D scan, being paid for out of pocket, but having someone that we could have called to speak to get some guidance, to just take us off the edge and get some understanding would have been really beneficial. So empathy, support, but guidance through experts is absolutely fundamental to that education piece. And then from a regulatory and compliance standpoint, at a geographic level, global level, it is constantly changing. Market maturity varies dramatically. In the UK, we're very fortunate to have the NHS, to have the HFAA, so bodies in place where you can get guidance and support, and we want to educate that. But ultimately, we know that that varies, but it shouldn't be on you to manage that. So ultimately, we try to take that away and manage that process for you and make sure that it's fully compliant. And then at a global level, we mentioned right at the start, we're doing that in 170 different markets. That'll continue to grow as demand grows, but ultimately we can do this at scale, and we are doing that with large multinationals, but equally we're doing it with really small organisations, 200, 250 headcount organisations that want to provide holistic support and care. So hopefully that's been valuable. We'd welcome, there's a couple of minutes, welcome any questions that there might be in the room, but our focus there has been very much to kind of draw upon client examples.
That's great, because I think the last thing you were talking about there gave some information on the types of companies or the type of demographic or nature of companies. It sounds very diverse. This feels like quite a new benefit, but would you say there's anything you could pull out either with regard to the geography or industry type or company size, or is it really as diverse as I think you were saying just there at the end?
I certainly think from an industry perspective, gone are the days where your typical tech, pharma, legal, professional services, financial services, the early adopters. You know, this is a very prevalent benefit. 1 in 3 organisations in the US now offer a fertility, family forming and hormonal health benefit. So it's very advanced, and we're seeing that grow in both markets like the UK where it's mature, but it's across a broad array of different markets and verticals.
I think when people hear carrot, they hear Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Salesforce, Spotify, but as you say, it is every single industry and it's every single size across every geography.
Yeah.
We do particularly well, we like the complex geographical spreads as well, because we're being global since day one. So we've been 10 years building up the foundation to support that. So complex is easy for us, which is wonderful, but across every single. And we were at a meeting yesterday, we just heard manufacturing and construction in the US are one of our fastest growing verticals. So you know when manufacturing and and construction are actively looking into this, that it's reaching.
But equally on that point, it's available to dependents, you know, so you can give this access to your spouse, your partner, and that's really powerful as well for them to give them that support.
Great point.
Okay. And whilst we're technically out of time, I'm just going to sneak in one more just for your thoughts. You've talked about, you know, where the industry has come from and got to. What do you see happening in the next 10 years in this space?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think it's different. I think the industry, I think the statistics speak for themselves. There's going to be more of a need. There's going to be more of a need even in heterosexual couples, because there is the underlying factors. But then, of course, LGBTQ plus and also single parents by choice, those statistics are growing so highly. So we know the need is growing. But how companies like ours take care of that need with employers is different.
Yeah.
In our case, we're going to be doubling down on investment in that human-centric, that very local approach to make sure there's people on the ground, because that's what people need. They need in their deepest hormonal journey to have another human being supporting and navigating them.
Thank you. That is super helpful. Thank you again, Jimmy and Aoife. And please do remember to take session.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.